Let us begin our journey together and hope you guys can enjoy the first session with Dr. Gareth. So I can give the floor now to Sama to moderate the session. So yes, the floor is yours, Sama. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Kareem, and hello, everyone. It is great to see you again. So I would like to see your excitement, guys, to begin your research journey with IPSF, as this is the official first session where you will start learning about the basics of research. And I'd like to know from 1 to 10, how are we feeling? You can type it in the chat. Before we start, I have to say the regulations for those who weren't able to attend the opening ceremony. And in a few sessions, you guys will be memorizing it. So type I if you have any new comments to the current topic, or 2 I's if it's a direct comment to a current topic being discussed. And if you're having any technical difficulties, please type T on the chat box. Also, guys, as we know, please enter the session 10 minutes early to ensure effective participation. And please keep your microphone muted when you're not speaking to minimize any background noise. You could turn on your video, of course. It enhances the interactive experience. And also there's the chat for any questions. We will be having a Q&A at the end of the session with Dr. Gareth. And now that everything has been explained, we also want to say that we have set up an evaluation system. And at the end of the session, I'll be explaining more into it. So your attendance here today is super important, and it shows that you are committed. I would like to get started, and it's time to introduce our esteemed speaker for today's session. Please, guys, join me in welcoming Dr. Gareth Dyke, who will be leading us through the presentation titled The Roadmap to Research Success. Dr. Gareth Dyke is the Director of Global Content at Research Square Company with a PhD in Geology and Biology. He also has a remarkable track record as a scientific author, researcher, and journal manager. He has published over 380 peer-reviewed articles in esteemed publications such as Nature and Science, and he also has extensive experience that lies in bridging the gap between publishing and academia and collaborating with organizations such as Top Edits, Edens, and Springer Nature. And he has also served as an associate professor at the University College of Dublin and the University of Southampton. So welcome, Dr. Gareth. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Wow, awesome. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's really great to be here and have the chance to do this and see so many people joining the session today. It's really absolutely fantastic. I shall share my screen and get started, right? Summer, that's what you'd like me to do, right?
Yes,
okay,
exactly,
cool.
Dr.
Great, awesome. It's great to see everybody. Let's hope this works. Sometimes it doesn't. All right. Hopefully you can see my screen, and also I can see people are coming into the waiting room now that you've made me the host. So while I'm doing the presentation, of course, I won't be able to admit anyone.
Yes, of course, we got this.
To the room. Awesome. Well, great. Thank you, everybody. Gareth is my name. I work as a freelance consultant these days for a number of companies. We'll talk about those in a little bit, but mostly what I do and have been doing since stopping working as a full-time academic 6 years ago or something like that is provide training courses, webinars, sometimes in-person courses to help researchers around the world, many of whom do not speak English as their native language. Our goal always is to help researchers, especially young researchers, to understand and be more effective at the publishing process. So that's what we're talking about today. We're going to be talking about a roadmap for publication planning, how to write and publish your papers in high impact factor journals. Of course, we've got a chat box. We've also got a Q&A session coming up at the end. Do put any comments or any questions that you have throughout this session in the chat box. We'll be coming back a little bit later to answer your questions and give you time to feedback and talk a little bit more about your experiences and how we can help with writing and publication planning. Dear Summer already introduced me. Gareth is my name, as already mentioned. I work still doing quite a lot of research. I'm a paleontologist, a geologist, a biologist in my background. publishing papers, working as an editor for a number of journals, academic journals, and working as a freelancer, as I mentioned already. And I'll talk a little bit, tiny bit, about some of the work that I'm doing at the end of this presentation today. So thank you again for the opportunity to do this. And thank you for joining this session, the roadmap, the academic publishing cycle. So if you're a young researcher just getting started, or if you're more experienced, maybe you're becoming familiar with what we like to call the academic publishing cycle, although sometimes I call it the academic hamster wheel, because we're always going round and around and around different stages of the cycle that you can see on the screen in front of you. Ideas for research, coming up with funding to get those projects off the ground, collecting data for testing those ideas, journal selection, very important. We'll talk about that a little bit more today. Article writing, of course, big issue for lots of people around the world, then submission and peer review and publication. So all of these different components of the writing and publishing academic hamster wheel, you might end up with papers, with projects at different stages of this cycle. As you get more experienced in your careers, you'll probably end up with lots of collaborations, lots of balls in the air, lots of projects on the go, all of them at different stages of this cycle. But this is our starting point for planning publications as researchers, working our way successfully through the different stages of the academic publishing cycle. And we're going to do it in a kind of staircase-like sequence in this presentation this afternoon, this evening. Preparation, things to think about before you begin to write a publication for submission to a journal. How are you going to sell yourself? How are you going to sell your research? How are you going to sell your ideas to journals? Capturing the attention of editors is very, very important in order to be successful, in order to get your papers successfully published in the target journals that you want to get your work published in. So preparation, learning how to sell yourself and sell your research. Structure, having a clear structure for your writing, for your research projects, so that people don't get lost when they read your work, very important. And then, of course, as well, effective writing. We'll talk about that a little bit later on in this presentation. So all of these different components come together in a roadmap for you as you build up a research project, preparing to write, selling yourself to journals, structuring your work when you make those submissions. We'll talk about that in a moment, and some tips and tricks for effective academic writing. And we've never been at a more exciting time, especially for non-native speaking English academic writing, because of course, so many AI tools, so much help is out there now for researchers to get their ideas, their research, their concepts, their hypotheses turned into academic articles that can go for peer review in international journals. It really is a fantastic time, absolutely great. It's wonderful again to have the chance to talk about these different components of the roadmap to academic article writing and publishing success. But before you begin to write, let's have a think about how we're going to target the research that we're doing, the articles that we're writing, to journals. Because of course, journal selection is your all-important first step in being successful. You want to make sure that your articles, your papers, when you publish them in journals, they stand out from all of the others. We see about 2 million papers published every year, and about 30,000 articles published in medical sciences, in health sciences, including pharmacology, neuropharmacology, every single month. It's an amazing amount of content that's being published around the world in peer-reviewed journals. So your first step in terms of planning your publication and thinking about how to get your work successfully out there into the wider world is going to be selecting a key target journal and making sure that your work, that your research stands out from all of the other published work that's out there, because of course you want people to read your papers, you want people to cite you, you want people to have the opportunity to use your work in the future. We don't just write academic papers to give them away as presents or stick them on the wall of our labs. We write them so that other people will cite them, read them, and use them in their research. So I would like to ask you, and do feel free at any point, as I've mentioned, to put comments into the chat box, get involved. We'll come back and we'll discuss this a little bit later on in our session. Why do you want to get a paper published in the first place? What's your motivation for wanting to write and publish an academic paper? Because different people have different motivations for doing that at different career stages. You might want to get published to get funded. You might want to get published to get promoted, or to develop research and development, or in many cases at young research stages to get your master's or get your PhD. Your motivations vary as your career develops. I used to know a guy working in LA who told me once he was publishing lots of papers in Nature and Science, and he told me, yes, well, I like to publish papers because when I die, I'm going to leave a legacy behind that other people will be able to use in the future. What's your motivation for wanting to write and publish academic papers? It's very, very important to think about this at the early stages of research, project design and development, and also to think and keep in mind that your motivations, your reasons for getting work published in peer-reviewed journals are different, often quite different, to those motivations of editors and peer reviewers. And we'll talk about what editors want in a moment, but what you want as a researcher to get your work published and the reasons for that are quite different from the motivations of editors and peer reviewers at journals. So we think about the planning process for publication success in terms of initially journal selection, and we'll come back to that in a moment, but also what happens when you submit a paper to an international journal. Because when you do that, when you make that submission, when you put your paper into the submission process at an international journal, they get triaged. Editors look at your paper and they go through a number of steps. They think about a number of issues around that submission. It's a bit like getting hit by a bus. If you go out on the street and get run over by a bus, you get taken to the hospital. Of course you do. Immediately at the hospital, the doctors are going to triage you. They're going to check to see what's needed, what work is needed, what operations are needed next. So just like going to a hospital, submitting a paper to a journal, we also call that initial process at the editorial office triage. They look at your paper and they think, does it fit with the journal's scope? Is the article original? Does the article have a clear message? Is the work important? And that depends upon the journal, the scope of the journal, and who the editors are, their own opinions, their personal feelings about your research, for example. They also think, is this research important? Is it true? And is it going to be relevant to our readers? So it's very important as you plan your research projects, you plan your submissions to international journals, you've got to sell yourself to get your work through that initial editorial triage stage. And of course, high impact factor journals like Nature, like Science, they want to maintain high rejection rates. They want to reject 9 out of 10 papers that get sent into those journals. They've got high rejection rates. So we need initially, when planning, submitting our papers to journals, we need initially to make sure that they're interesting for editors so that the editor will send the paper out for peer review. I wonder if I could just ask everybody, if you're listening to this, just to check that you're muted. That will be great because we are hearing a little bit of background noise. Yeah, so do have a look, make sure that you're muted. Maybe the Maybe the moderators of this session can also have a look through and see if people are unmuted. That would be absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much. The first step of article submission, editorial triage, as we call it, the criteria considered by desk editors at journals. So let's think about what you need to know, things to think about before you start to write your next academic paper. 3 things to know before you start to write as you begin the publication planning process. Choosing your topic, of course. You know that you're all researchers working in a particular defined area, pharmacy, pharmacology, neuropharmacology, for example, identifying your audience, your target journal. Where are you going to submit your work? Where are you going to send it for publication? Your purpose and supporting details. And I always like to say, really, it's important before you begin a research write-up, before you begin to think about writing up your research for submission to an international journal, have 3 things in mind. 3 things in mind: your message, your audience, that's your target journal, and the structure of your writing, which of course comes from your target journal. If you have a target journal in mind as you begin the write-up process, that helps an awful lot with the submission and with the work towards getting your paper successfully published. So if you forget everything else that we talk about in our webinar today, if you fall asleep, if you don't remember anything all the way through the session at the end, please try to remember this key message. Before you begin to write, think about your message. What is it about your research results that's important and interesting to editors at the journal that you plan to make your submission? Your message, your audience, that's your target journal, of course, and the structure for your writing, which, as we've already mentioned, comes from the target journal itself. So message, audience, and structure provide us with a backbone as our roadmap for starting to put our paper together. What is your message? Very important skill to learn. How are you going to explain the message of your research, what you've done, what you've collected, what you've found, to people who do not understand anything necessarily about your research? Here's a picture of my granny, a bus driver perhaps. How are you going to explain the message of your research to somebody who doesn't understand what you've been working on? This is a key skill for researchers around the world. You have to explain what you're working on to funding agencies. You have to explain what you're working on to people who do not have the same level of specialist subject area understanding that you do. So this is a great example. We always used to use this technique when we interviewed PhD students over in the UK. Tell me a little bit about this project, and imagine that you've just met me on the bus or in the cafe. Tell me your message in simple and easy to understand words and phrases. This is key, and it's one of the 3 core things to have in mind at the beginning of your research write-up. Message, audience, and structure. This is messaging in academic article preparation. It's key to success when you send your papers to international journals, because if editors, those people doing the gotten hit by a bus editorial triage as you send your paper into the journal, if they can't work out your take-home message, they're going to reject your paper without sending it out for peer review. They'll also reject your paper if you can't convince them of your study's importance. Editors think, if I'm interested in this work, my readers will be too. And that's key to remember. We write academic papers for readers. As I've already mentioned, the key here is to make sure that you structure and write up your research in such a way that lots of people want to read it. Lots of people want to get your message. Make sure that your readers are interested in your articles as you write them up. So message, audience, and structure. We will talk about how to do this effectively a little bit later on in this presentation, but do keep in mind the 3 things to have in your mind before you begin the writing process. And we prepare to write. We provide templates, as I'll show you a few in this presentation today. If you'd like more, you'd like to get in touch, do feel free to get in touch with the organizers of this presentation or directly with me on LinkedIn. I'll give you my email address, contact number at the end of the session. You can check the original nature of your results, the story, the take-home message, asking yourself, is this work new and interesting? And if so, why? Does my work relate to a currently hot topic? What's new and challenging about the research that I'm doing? Do I provide a solution to a difficult problem? So you are focused on a particular research project. You get very narrowly focused on that particular research project. Think broadly. Try to think how you're going to explain the outcomes of your research to somebody that doesn't have any idea about what you're working on specifically. Think about my granny, for example. It's all in the story. How you assemble your research message into 1 or 2 sentences will be key to getting funding, getting papers published, getting jobs, getting postdocs, being able to explain your research and why it's important to ordinary people, to taxpayers, to government people is very, very important. So before you begin your next write-up for your next research paper, try and write down in 1 or 2 sentences what's interesting and important about that piece of research. Message. The second thing, of course, is your audience. Selecting a target journal, very important for researchers around the world, of course. At the moment, of course, still, we are encouraging researchers, of course, to aim high. Make a list. Maybe you've got a list already of journals that you'd like to get your work published in your research field. Put your journals into a list and aim high. Aim for journals with higher impact factors if possible. But of course, you've got to choose appropriately. You can't get all of your work published in Nature and Science. You will have to talk to editors. You'll have to talk to colleagues. You'll have to learn, and we can help you to do that. That's part of the point of these training sessions, to sell and manage your submissions to international journals. Message, your audience, your target journal, aiming high, going for journals in your list that have higher impact factors preferentially, but talking to people, writing pre-submission inquiries to editors. Thinking about those target journals in terms of impact factor, reputation within your field, reach within your field. You want to get your work read by people in your own research area who are going to be influential in the shape of your career in the future. And also thinking about whether the journal that you've selected is open access or not. And we can certainly talk in more details about that in our session in the Q&A a little bit later. But message and journal selection, your audience for your next paper, very, very important. I do strongly recommend, of course, that when you're thinking about sending an article to a journal, when you've got your list of journals, you've got that ranked list assembled by impact factor, you start to think about where you'd send your research. Write pre-submission inquiries. You can send emails to editors. You can write with your cover letter, with your abstract, with your title. Write to the editors, write pre-submission inquiries. Ask them if they would be interested in seeing this article submitted to their journal. And you, of course, can write as many pre-submission inquiries as you like. You're not tying yourself to anything. You can only submit your paper to one journal, of course, but you can make as many pre-submission inquiries as you want. So I'll give you a template. We'll follow up with that at the end of this session today so that you can be more effective about your journal selection. So what have we talked about so far? We've talked about things to think about before you start to write. Your message, your audience, target journal, and the structure of your writing. We're going to come back and talk about writing structure a little bit later on in our time together today, but let's have a quick look at some English tips, some tips and tricks for academic writing. Maybe this is basic, maybe it's useful. Let's have a look. Let's see. Do put your comments into the chat box. Do see how we get on with English tips and tricks for academic writing, because we all get letters like this from journals. Dear sir, dear madam, many thanks for asking whether we would like to publish your paper. It's good and original, but unfortunately we are simply not willing to publish it. The good bits were not original, and the original bits were not good. Rejection from international peer-reviewed journals happens all the time. I reckon that working as a researcher, working as an academic, you're going to experience more rejection in your career than in almost any other kind of work. Perhaps if you work as a salesperson, you get rejected more or just as much. There's constant rejection for us as academic researchers, but how we deal with it, how we manage rejection, how we bounce back from the experience is going to define how your career develops. And of course, there's no reason at all why the research that anyone is doing in any country, anywhere in the world, is of lower quality than anywhere else. I firmly, strongly believe that. International research publishers, however, often reject our research, and many of the reasons for that can be because of submissions to journals outside scope, plagiarism, incorrect formatting, although that is decreasing these days, poor English writing. And this is very important. And I'm going to just show you a few things, a few tips, a few ideas as part of our roadmap for success in terms of English academic writing, because there, of course, is no reason why a paper should get rejected because of its poor English, but it happens all the time because, of course, your great, wonderful, fantastic research message that we talked about before might have gotten buried in the language, and we don't want that. And as I mentioned already, this is a very exciting time because we have gazillions of AI tools and other tricks and techniques that we can use to make sure that we don't fall into that trap of getting our papers rejected because of issues with the language. So, you know, I collect issues with English where you communicate in English and you make some mistakes, your meaning may be scrambled. And we don't want that with our research, because you've got fantastic research results that we want to share with everybody. It's important that your academic research message is not buried in language issues. And here we have the key, the universal language of scientific academic communication. I would argue that indeed you can learn a lot from the experience of writing effectively in English. Academic papers need to be well written and well structured, often to a higher standard of English than you might find in other writing. But the writing process can be fun. It can be beneficial. It can be an intellectual activity in its own right. The question is, how can you improve your English? I have some heroes here on this slide, and the pictures got mixed up a little bit, but we know who Winston Churchill is, of course. He's famous for mobilizing the English language and sending it into battle. As John F. Kennedy, the US president, famously said, two journalists that are heroes of mine, both of whom are too dyslexic to be able to actually write. And the point I want to make with this is that your message, your English research message, can now easily be communicated into written form without you actually needing to do much or any of the writing. You can speak into a webinar like this. You can speak into a Zoom. You can get that transcribed by an AI assistant. You can get that edited by ChatGPT. You can get that put into journal format by a range of other tools. You can do lots of things to get your message across effectively as a researcher. You just have to tell the journal, tell the publisher, be open about what you've done. And I'm a big fan of journalism in particular, and a big fan of people who use tools and techniques and strategies to turn their fantastic thoughts and ideas into carefully well-written and well-structured academic papers. And it's getting easier and easier. Let's talk about that in the Q&A a little bit later on in this session. But do ask yourself, how do you feel about writing in English? How do you start the writing process? Do you carefully construct a plan beforehand? Or do you just jump in and start writing that kind of plan? Thank you. Anyway, sorry, I had to mute somebody there. Do check if you'd be so kind that you're muted. That would be wonderful. That would be fantastic. That would be amazing. We should be like Arnold. In the middle of the slide, our friend Arnold, he makes a plan. He's a bricklayer. He's going to have a carefully constructed plan before he begins the writing process. That's why we talk about message. That's why we talk about audience, and that's why we talk about your structure in your academic writing as being absolutely critical and absolutely key. You need a plan, you need a structure, you need to have that structure in place before you begin your writing process. And you certainly can learn from researchers who've come before. That's why looking at journals and looking at places where you would like to see your research published gives you the opportunity to see well-written and well-structured, already published pieces of writing that you can base your own work around, that you can use as templates for your own research articles. So how can you write more effectively in English? Try to think in English and write as you think. Try to write a little bit every day and work with papers already published successfully in your field that you respect, that you like, that you would like to publish similar kinds of papers in your own research work. This is one of the best pieces of advice I was given as a PhD student. You're going to write a paper, go and find other papers that are going to look similar in the target journal that you want to publish your work in to the piece of work that you are putting together. That way you can see how well-written, well-structured titles, abstracts, introductions, figure captions, and so on are put together, because basically academic English, 6 key features: short sentences, no unnecessary words, familiar words, active voice as opposed to the passive voice, clear style, and effective punctuation. Very, very, very important. And of course, we have a company called SciTrain. You can see it on the screen next to me. If you'd like us to do more presentations like this for your university, for your research group, for your team, we'd love to. And we've got lots of webinars and lots of presentations just ready to go. So do get in touch with me. Do connect on LinkedIn after this presentation. I'd be delighted to share with you recordings, other content, other information around the writing and publishing hamster wheel that we talked about at the beginning of this session today. But in terms of our roadmap, let's get back to structure, message, audience, and structure, the 3 things to have in mind before you begin the writing process. We've talked about messaging, how you can explain the simple, clear message of your next research project to somebody like my granny. Your audience, that's journal selection. We've talked about that a little bit as well. What about structuring your next paper? And here are some tips for those different sections that go into an academic article. You may very well be familiar with what we like to call the IMRAD, academic article structure: introduction, methods, results, and discussion, with the title, the authors, and the keywords and abstract at the top of the article. And these are very, very important, because your title and your abstract are really the key windows into your research, which will enable other people to get access to your work and will enable editors and peer reviewers to make decisions about your paper when it gets sent to them for assessment. So let's quickly, and this is going to be a quick run through the different sections of academic writing. Again, as I mentioned before, if you'd like more information, just get in touch. Lots of other content, lots of other ideas for these different sections. But you're beginning to think about your structure. You're going to be like Arnold. You're going to be like a bricklayer. You're going to put together an article structure based upon your target journals, the journals that you've selected or the journal that you've selected to send this particular piece of research work to. Message, audience, and structure. A good title for your next research paper should contain the fewest possible words to adequately describe the contents of your research. Keep it short. Short is always much better, identifying the main issue of the study, the subject. Accurate, unambiguous, specific, and complete. No infrequently used abbreviations that nobody outside of your subject area has ever heard of. And above all, you want to attract your readers' attention. Get them interested, attract them to the study, allure them, get them wanting to read your work. Editors, peer reviewers, and other readers attract their attention. Research has shown, by the way, that if your article title is less than 7 words in length, you're going to get more citations, you're going to get more readers, you're going to get more people engaging with your article. So let's have a good long think about the title and the abstract, because these are the bits of your research that are used by search engines and bring in other readers, engage other researchers, get them interested in picking up that PDF and reading your study. So a title needs to be compelling, concise, and informative. The most important words related to the topic. Entice your readers without giving away the punchline. Many journals, especially in your field, pharmacology, may now insist on including information on study design. We put some quick examples together from highly cited papers from 2022. They're short. They give you the message. And an article title can either be declarative. It tells you the answer to a particular question. A declarative title, a new drug is the cure for cancer. That tells the reader the answer to a question. Or an article could be non-declarative. New study on new drugs in relation to cancer, for example. Declarative, where you give the answer. Non-declarative, where you tease the reader, you give the reader like a bit of insight, you get them kind of attracted, allured, you bring them in and want them to get to read your study. Or a title can be interrogative or interrogative, or however you say that word. It's a question itself. When is enteral nutrition indicated, for example? These are the 3 main kinds of academic article titles: declarative, non-declarative, and interrogative. And medical journals, they hate declarative titles. They often tell you in their author instructions not to write a declarative title, a new drug, or my new drug is the cure for cancer, because they want people to actually read the study. So have a think about what kind of title you're going to write with your next research. It's very, very important. Keep it short. Get people interested, attract them, allure them, get them wanting to come in and read your next paper. You want to successfully get your work through that editorial triage stage, that stage where you get hit by a bus, or you make a submission, you go to the hospital, you go to the editorial office, and your paper gets assessed for peer review. That's your title. Let's have a quick talk about abstracts. Very difficult to write, often 200 or 250 words in length. A good quality abstract is honest and precise. It's got to stand alone, no technical jargon, short and specific. The quality of your article abstract will inform your editor's decision as to whether or not to send the paper out for peer review or not. So it's very, 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 very important. And many journals base their decisions on the abstract alone. And of course, many authors write the abstract of their papers in a big rush, almost as an afterthought at the end of the process. This has to be a short, concise, standalone piece of writing with a very clear message, accurately reflecting the full text of the paper. You can do it easily if you follow what we call the 4-question-based technique for abstract writing. And it's on the bottom of this slide. You write down these 4 questions, and then you answer them with information relating to your particular study, and then you just have to delete the questions. So write down these questions. Why did you do the study? What did you do? What did you find? And what did you conclude? What did you do? So why did you do the study? What did you do? What did you find? And what did you conclude? In sequence, and answer those questions in sequence, and then delete the questions. You will have the basis for an excellent abstract, which of course is structured. And that's what we really want to see. Even if your journal, your target journal, is not asking you for a structured abstract, I recommend that you write one anyway. Using this technique, then you can just delete the structure. Here's an example of a structured abstract. We see them often in biology, in medicine, in chemical fields, but give it a go, because this will really help you to organize and structure your ideas as a researcher. And indeed, if you go to high impact factor journals like Nature and Science, Current Neuropharmacology, for example, you can go in with a colored marker, a little colored pencil, and you can mark off the answers to my 4 questions in sequence in the article, in the abstract, in the study. That's what makes the abstract readable. That's what makes the abstract accessible to other researchers. Because of course, message, audience, and structure, you've got to give your readers information that helps them with the reading process of your paper. They've got to know where they've come from. They've got to know where they are now, and they've got to know where they are going. A plot is needed in academic writing. It's really no different to a detective story or a movie. You've got to put that structure in place. And hopefully in this presentation today, although I'd love to come back and do more, maybe for your research team or your university, how you can do this with templates, with tricks and techniques for writing the different sections of academic articles. We've talked about titles, keep it short. We've talked about abstracts. Follow the 4-question-based technique for writing an effective abstract. What about the rest of the paper? What about the rest of that IMRAD academic structure? What about the rest of the study? How are you going to put that together in an effective, easy to follow and easy to understand way? Well, remember, on average, an academic article published in the international peer-reviewed literature is about 6,000 words or so in length, 5,000 to 6,000 words. So the first thing for me to say about the body of your article is that it's got to be balanced. You can't have an introduction that's 10,000 words long and then a little method section, a little results section, and a little discussion. It's got to be balanced. The paper has to balance. So how much words have you got for the introduction? In your planning process, you've probably got about 1,500 to 2,000 words that you can use to put together an effective introduction, depending on your target journal. Message, audience, and structure. Don't forget, you've already got a target journal in mind, so you can use that target journal, have a look at other recently published papers in your subject area in that journal to see what their introductions look like. But I would say you want to do 3 things. Grab the reader, keep the introduction short, and avoid a literature review. A good introduction has 3 distinct sections. Section 1, you state the question, the hypothesis, what your paper is going to address. Section 2, you give the reader what we call a state of the art. You talk about relevant recent literature that's been published that's important to your question that you put in part 1. And in part 3, you bridge between the introduction and the methods. And you can see this done very effectively in papers in Nature and in Science. For example, the top science journals in the world, because their introduction sections always finish with a short phrase, "Here we show." And then they tell the reader what's coming in the paper. That bridges your introduction and your method section. So 3 sections, keep it short. First section, you talk about what the question is. In the second section, you give the reader a state of the art. In the third section, you bridge to the materials and methods. Your opening sentence takes the reader straight to the issue. You need a summary of the controversies and best evidence in your introduction, keeping within the rules of good writing, often written in the active voice. Here we show, here we develop, Here we test. These are the most important issues in my introduction, ending with that crisp and clear research question and how you are going to answer it as a researcher. So 3 paragraphs, I would say, would be useful as a template for your introduction. What's the question? What's the state of the art? And this study shows, or here we show, bridging the introduction and the methods section. Now, of course, we're quickly going through this. If you'd like more, do get in touch. Be delighted to send follow-up recordings or get in touch with your team afterwards. But this is the best bit of academic article writing. It's the best part. Everybody always thinks that the methods section is boring, but that's not true. It's the best bit of academic writing. Here you've got the chance to really show what you did in the different parts of your experiment, of the different parts of your study. It comes directly from your notes. It comes directly from the timeline, from the sequence of events that you went through doing the study. So you structure it according to that sequence of events, according to that timeline, what you did first, what you did second, what you did third, what you did fourth, and what you did last. Data collection followed by data analysis. Data analysis has to come after data collection, of course, because you've got to collect your data before you can analyze it. So this is a sequence of events. In the methods section, very important to keep that in mind. And also, the most common reason for article rejection at peer-reviewed journals, other than English issues, which is terrible, but that's the situation, it's a problem in the methods section. Either peer reviewers or editors don't understand the methods that authors used, so you've got to make sure that your methods section is absolutely bulletproof. It's absolutely robust. It's going to pass through peer review. So show it to people before you send your paper off to a journal. Show it to colleagues. Show it to other researchers. Ask them, is there enough information here in my methods for somebody else to understand the work that I did? Important, particularly in the statistical analyses, you've got to make sure that everything is going to pass through peer review. And in the results, by the way, which is very often the part of academic article writing where people begin the writing process, people often make the mistake, by the way, of starting at the title, working through their paper from beginning to end when they write it. That's not the best way to do it. Start with your results, work on into your methods, and then branch out into the introduction, discussion, and conclusions. Here you base your work in the results around your figures, your tables, your data collection, and structure it in the same way, in the same sequence as you have your methods section sequence, because things have to happen in sequence. There has to be that structure in academic writing. Remember, you're building a structure. You're being like Arnold, brick by brick from beginning to end. And that's the reason, by the way, that very often, and if you haven't noticed this, go and have a look at some recent papers in your field. The results section and the methods section often tend to have very similar structure to them. Information is presented often in quite the same sequence. So keep that in mind as well, because in your results, you're talking about the facts, nothing but the facts, no interpretation yet. That comes later in the discussion, ordering your outcomes around primary and secondary things in the same order as you put them in the method section, stating clearly and simply what you found using words and numbers, using your figures and tables as the basis for your results section. And again, lots more content that we can share on this, lots more tips and tricks for writing these different sections, but they very often have the same structure as the methods, ending with analysis after data collection followed by analysis in that sequence in these different sections. Top tip for writing the results: make your figures first, base your text around your figures, interpreting each of your core results in prose, putting those into the results section in the same sequence as you build up your experimental design, as you build up and put into your methods section. And then finally, the discussion, interpretation, synonyms, aren't they? In English, in this section, you're free to explain what your results mean or why they differ from what others have found. Interpret your results in the light of other published work and start your discussion section by giving the reader the answer to the question that your paper addresses. You may have seen these diagrams for academic article writing that have a kind of hourglass shape. At the top of your discussion section, give the reader the answer to the question that your paper seeks to address, the answer to the hypothesis, the outcome of the experiment or the trial at the beginning of the discussion. And then you relate it back to your introduction, relate it back to the issues that you raised there, limiting your data and your conclusions to what you can actually support. Don't put too much egg in the pudding, as we like to say in English, and suggesting future research directions. If you think of something when you're putting your discussion section together that you might work on in the future, write about it in your paper, because that means that other people have to cite you. They can't read your paper and think, oh, that's a great idea that I've gotten from reading this study. You've got to put that into your papers so that other people are going to cite you. Okay? Very, very important to do that as well. So we don't want an expansive essay that goes all over the place. Start your discussion with a single sentence that states your main findings, and don't forget to discuss those strengths and weaknesses as well. In a well-written discussion section, relate your study to what's already been found. Discuss what your study means and give the readers those unanswered questions. But do not, no, do not finish your paper with a sentence like, more research will be needed if we are ever to fully address this question, or further research will be required. That's boring. That's obvious. Of course, further research will be required. That's a very weak way to end an academic paper. You're running a race. And just like running a race, you want to finish strong. People ask, how can I put together a conclusion section for an academic paper? Well, put your outcomes, put your results in order. Write them down on a piece of paper from least important to most important. And that's how to finish your study with the most important outcome, the most important conclusion in the final sentence. Finish strong, like running a race as you put your discussion section together. And often, again, the structure here can closely follow the methods and results as you talk about items in sequence in your discussion section. So here's that IMRAD academic structure. Think carefully about your title, think carefully about your abstract, and I've given you a few tips and tricks for the main text sections. Of course, there's lots more to say. Get in touch. We'd be delighted to provide you with any follow-up information at the end of this presentation, because this is what a paper looks like. It looks like an egg timer. It looks like an hourglass. Your introduction starts broad with information at the top of the paper about why the study is important. It's broad, okay? Why you did the study. In the methods and results, you're being very specific. You're talking about this particular piece of research. What did you do and what did you find? And then in the discussion, remember, you start by talking about the answer to the question that your paper addresses, and then getting broad, getting bigger, getting wider in context and wider in scope as you talk about what the study means, logically linking all your ideas throughout your academic paper. It's a good template to follow, I do find, because structure, remember that we talked at the beginning of this about the 3 things to know before you begin to write your message, my granny, your audience, your target journal, and the structure of your writing. It's no different to reading a detective story. I'm a huge Agatha Christie fan. You've got to know where you are, where you've come from, and where you are going. Your readers are the most important people in academic publishing, because your readers are going to cite your work. So we don't write papers for ourselves. We don't write them for our parents as presents. We write them for our readers. Keep that in mind as well, please, everybody listening to this, because the bottom line here, the final message here really is that you will get published. You will, if you pick an important research question. And that's up to you and your research advisors, your supervisors, your colleagues at your institution. You will get published if you use the right method to address the question that you seek to answer. And that goes back to what we talked about before about how your method section really does need to be completely watertight. Okay, so that when it goes to peer review, it has the highest possible chance of acceptance. Remember that the #1 reason for article rejection or problems during peer review is because of issues in the method section. And you will get published if you write a short, clear account of your study, following a tight structure and using effective writing to convey your message clearly. And that's where we can help with seminars and webinars and training sessions like this to help you with your academic writing and publication planning. Remember good old Winston Churchill? He used to say that success consists of going from failure to failure without any loss of enthusiasm. And that's really important as an academic. You're going to face rejection. You're going to face problems in writing and publishing, but how you deal with those issues is going to be what shapes your academic career. So here's what we talked about today: preparation, selling yourself, structuring your writing, and how to put your papers together in an effective way. If you've been asleep throughout the whole of this presentation and you're just waking up now, before you write your next paper, think about your message, think about your audience, and think about the structure of your writing. Think about how Arnold puts his papers together. He's a bricklayer. He has a structure. He doesn't just write off in all directions. He has a template before he gets going. Thank you very much for listening. Here's the hamster wheel of academic writing and publishing. And now at this point, having talked way too much, I'm going to turn back the mic to the organizers of this fantastic event in case there are any questions, comments, feedback. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for listening. Let me see if we have any questions in the chat.
Well,
I don't know if
thank you
anyone else
so
wants
much,
to come
Dr.
in. Yeah.
Garrett. I'd say this is such an exciting and very informative session. I see there's great spirit with everyone. Everyone's commenting. Everyone is excited and interested for the research journey. So this is amazing. We will have 10 minutes. If you guys have any questions, please ask them in the chat. And thank you so much, Dr. Garrett, for your time. I think everyone is very happy in the chat, as you can see.
You can write me messages, connect on LinkedIn, get in touch. I'll put my email here as well, so you can write to me if anyone wants to get in touch. If there's any specific questions that you'd like to, follow up, just give me my email here. So that you're very welcome to get in touch. Do we have questions now? Are we going to do some?
Yes, I think someone
feedback?
asked a question.
I've lost it. The chat's just filled up with
Yes,
other comments.
I think they said, why should we avoid literature review?
Oh, okay. Well, in your subject area, in pharmacy, pharmacology, when you're writing up primary research for academic peer review, the literature review will not be needed in the actual article that you put together. A literature review such as the kind of review that you might make when you begin a research project. So going through all of the topics and information that's previously been written on that particular subject is something that you do at the beginning of a project, right? In order to identify what we call a knowledge gap. And so that's why it's very often done by PhD students, by master students when they begin a research project, summarizing all of the available literature in order to determine where to take their research next, in order to determine where the knowledge gap, as we call it, is, right? So that's the purpose of a literature review, as well as to get yourself up to speed with your particular subject area. But if you look at primary literature in your field, you won't see pages and pages and pages of a complete review of everything that's been done in the field. You'll see a short state of the art, as we call it, a short paragraph or paragraphs in the introduction where the writer is giving you all of the information that you need to have to understand the question. So current relevant literature to the question that the paper addresses. That's what I mean. It's a great question there. Thank you for it. Someone has their hand up, I see. Maze? Forgive my pronunciation.
Yes, that's me. Yes, it's me. So I have a question about, you said we
Oops, shit.
I think you muted Mice.
I know, I'm really sorry. I pressed the wrong button. I did it again. I'm sorry.
it's
I'm
fine.
just going to
Can you
stay
hear
away
me
from
now?
the key. I can. I'm going to keep my hands away from the keyboard. Sorry, Maze.
Yeah, it's true. It's Mace. Thank you for pronouncing it right. So my question is, you said earlier that we can use AI to help us in writing. I use it sometimes to check for spelling mistakes or
Right.
rephrase something like that. But like, how can I disclose that I used AI if some editors still view it as taboo?
Yeah, it doesn't actually depend on the editors and their feelings about this. It depends upon the journals and the publishers and their feelings about this. So different at the moment, there's no standardized protocol, even within individual publishers on this particular topic. So what you need to do is when you've selected a journal, a target journal for your research, go and have a look at whether they have specific guidelines published yet about the use of AI, right? If they don't, then in your cover letter, when you make your submission to the journal, you need to say that, you know, this paper was written entirely by me, but then I used X, Y, and Z editing tools or paraphrasing tools in order to polish the language, okay? So there's, at least amongst the major publishers, Springer Nature, Wiley, Elsevier, Taylor and Francis, you know, there are no issues with the use of these tools so long as you disclose that when you make your submissions, okay?
Yeah, I know. It's just that some academics, when ChatGPT came into light, they made like few statements or research regarding how sometimes AI can help people who do plagiarism and that sort of thing. So
Yeah.
that's what I was wondering. Also, you said before something about that sometimes incorrect formatting is an issue in writing. I don't understand what that means, if you can elaborate more.
Well, there are a number of journals that will reject papers if the papers aren't correctly formatted for that particular journal. Okay, I mean, it's decreasing every day because more and more journals and more publishers are giving like a kind of free form submission process, but there still are journals that require specific kinds of formatting when you make the submission. That's all I mean with that comment. But at
Oh,
the
so you're talking
editorial
about the
formatting the
sorry.
paper for a journal, yeah. So at the editorial office stage, that triage stage that we talked about, that kind of being hit by a bus phase of academic publishing, when they check your paper, when it first comes into the journal, you could get rejected depending on the journal if you haven't formatted the paper correctly, which is a pain that still can happen. That's all I meant with that comment.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. I think Adib is raising his hand. Yes.
Yes. Thank you, Doctor, for this amazing lecture. You can hear me, yeah?
Yeah, 100%. Loud and clear.
Yeah, thank you. So I would ask a question. Since the journals would look at the abstract and the message, why we need to write the message on the first place? I think the abstract would be more clear, and we'll discuss the research more and more. So writing a message from the first place wouldn't be needed if the journals would look at it, would look at the abstract, and the readers themselves would read the whole research.
Absolutely. Like, I totally see what you're saying. Like, this is a strategy, Adi, for preparing yourself to write a paper that has a high chance of acceptance. Okay. So what I meant by that is that before you begin writing, let's imagine that you've just finished an experiment or a clinical trial, or collecting some patient data, for example, and you're thinking to yourself about how you're going to get that published. Okay. And which journal you're going to send that piece of research to for publication. One of the key things to do at the beginning of that planning process is to have a think about what's the key message of the research that you've just done. That's what I meant by that, okay? So you might have a bunch of data, you might have a bunch of outcomes and a bunch of results, but what is the key message? What is the takeaway that you want people to get from this particular piece of research? And so once you have that, and sometimes it takes a lot of time because research might be very specific, you need to try to be as broad as possible with this message so that as many people as possible are going to be interested in reading the paper. That key message will then help you a lot when you write your title, when you write your abstract, and when you put your discussion and conclusion section together. Because one of the tricks in the writing, and we didn't have time to talk about this today, but you must repeat yourself when you write a paper, so that people get that message right at the end of the process. So I don't know, let's take a silly example, but let's say you've just found a drug that's the cure for cancer, right? That's your message, right? You need that in the title. You need that in the abstract in several places. You need that in other parts of the paper so that you're sure that when somebody gets to the end of the study, they remember that message, okay? That's what I mean by that. Does that make sense? I hope that helps.
So messages usually are written on the end of the research, not at top of the research.
Yeah, they can be. I mean, often if you have a great outcome from your study, you'd want to even talk about that in the title of the paper. That's what we call a declarative title, where you actually say in the title, a new drug does X, Y, and Z, right? That's a certain kind of article title. And it's a good strategy, but like I said in the presentation, many medical journals discourage that because they want people to actually read the paper before they start cutting people up or prescribing drugs and stuff like that. So, but I'm sorry if I wasn't clear enough. But yeah,
No, thank you. I
so
understand. Thank you.
great.
Thank you, Dr. Garrett. I think we have around 5 people raising their hand. I'm not sure how much time you got left.
I mean, I've as much time as we need.
Awesome. I think we have Saeed. Saeed, can you hear us?
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you for this amazing session. I will ask you about one point. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah, 100%.
We in the Middle East suffer from high cost of publishing in journals with high impact factor. Even we have a good idea for publishing or good idea as a research paper. So however comes this point or this problem?
Yeah, this is a very common question and a very big issue for lots of researchers all over the world. The high cost of publishing, especially in open access journals. Open access journals, of course, if you publish in one of these journals, your research is available to anybody at any institution. So most researchers are very keen on the idea of open access because their research results will be accessible to everybody. But unfortunately, the publishers have developed this into a very effective business model. And you have to pay very often what we call an article processing charge, an APC, which can be several $1,000s in some journals. Nature, for example, if you want your paper to be fully open access and you're lucky enough to get your paper accepted in Nature, the article processing charge for full open access publication will be $11,000 which is just unbelievable, incredible, and how can you mitigate this? Well, with careful journal selection is one way, and we can certainly help you with that, like by finding journals, identifying journals in your field that are either traditional, so published behind a subscription paywall for institutions where there's no cost to publishing, and or looking for ways to defray that cost. So very often, if you say to a journal editor that you're a student, for example, they will give you a discount or defray that article processing charge entirely. So it's often very good to say, I'm doing my PhD, I don't have any funding, can you give me a discount on the publication fees? But yeah, if you want to get in touch with me at the end, we can talk much more about this and strategies and issues and where you can find journals that will be able to publish work, decent impact factors, Q1 and Q2. So thank you for that question. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Awesome.
Doctor.
People are asking about recordings and PDFs and stuff.
Yes.
We're going to send everybody a recording, right? And the PDF of the slides, right?
Yes, I will be addressing all the questions at the end. But I think we could continue with the questions if you'd like.
Of course. Sure.
Of course. Yeah,
Definitely.
awesome. So we have Hisham.
Thank you, Dr. Gareth. I want to ask one question. In the context of multidisciplinary research, authors often encounter challenges in securing peer reviewers who have enough expertise across all aspects of the study. So how can we, as author, can navigate this difficulty effectively to ensure a thorough peer review in considering all the diverse disciplines involved?
Well, that's a great question. The first comment I would make in response to that is that it's not the author's responsibility to find peer reviewers. Like, it should not be up to the authors to suggest peer reviewers to journals. Almost always, it's the journal editor who is responsible for finding peer reviewers. Of course, you can make suggestions, and you should make suggestions in your cover letter. That's very important, and it's a very good strategy for effectively getting your papers published. Make sure you put some names and email addresses for potential peer reviewers into your cover letter, but it will be up to the editor to find the peer reviewers. And that's often, as you mentioned, like an issue in multidisciplinary research. But what they'll do most often is they'll go to multiple peer reviewers from the different fields. So if you're, for example, working in a field that crosses over between physics and engineering, let's say, they'll find some peer reviewers who are, if they can't find multidisciplinary experts to work on the study, they'll find a selection of people from those two disciplines. Okay, I hope that helps.
Yes, thank you.
People are asking for my contact information.
Yes, a lot of people asking
yes,
for
yes.
LinkedIn, and we'll be sending it on the group chat for everyone. If you don't mind, Dr.
Great.
Gareth, after the session.
Of course. Yeah, my LinkedIn is just my name, so you can
Yes.
find me there if you want. But send me an email. Absolutely. I've just put my email into the chat again. It's just garethdyke@gmail.com. Gareth is a Welsh name. Maybe you know that Wales is one of the countries of the United Kingdom. And Gareth, like if you're a football fan, maybe you've heard of Gareth Bale, who used to play for Real Madrid and Wales. So it's a very common Welsh name. So that's my name. Thank you.
Interesting, Doctor. Okay, so we could continue with the questions. I think we
Sure,
have
of course.
Quadri. I hope I'm saying your name right.
Hello.
Hello.
Good day, good day, Doctor. Thank you very much for the section. And I want to ask one question as regard what you said about literature review. Like, let's say we want to write secondary research paper. Now, are we going to do are we going to do literature review, or what we need is to review the primary research papers? Do you get my question?
I think so. Like about literature review and how much of a literature review you should put into a balanced article. Is that right? Did I understand?
like
Okay.
like let's say we have to write a second research paper via, let's say,
Yeah.
systematic review, or let's say meta-analysis, or let's say rapid
Yeah.
review.
Right.
Are we
Okay.
now are we going to, is it that we are going to make use of the already existing paper that
Yeah.
that happens to be original,
Of
I mean
course.
primary
Yeah.
research paper,
Yeah.
or we are going to do literature review, sir?
Yes, absolutely. So Kadri, like this is a different, like I've been talking in this presentation about primary, like hypothesis-based, like experimental papers. Of course, if you're going to write a systematic review, which of course many of you will, in your field, then of course, in a systematic review, you will need to include a comprehensive background synthesis of the previous literature on your topic. That's quite right. Forgive me, I was talking in this presentation about structuring like primary research articles that are like experimental or hypothesis based. But yeah, like we can, you're right, systematic reviews are a specific kind of publication that we see only in health sciences, medical sciences, fields like pharmacy and so on. So let's talk about that. If you could get in touch with me afterwards, I can send you some follow-up information, some content about how to write systematic reviews. And that goes for everybody listening to this. If you have a specific kind of paper that you need help with, just get in touch. So in Kadri's case, like I'll send some PDFs and some recordings about systematic reviews. Thank you for your question, sir. Hope that was helpful.
Oh,
And,
thank you very much, doctor. Thank you very much.
Of course.
Yes, thank you. It is very helpful. And I think next we have Mu'taz.
Yes, hello, doctor.
Hi,
First of all, thank you for this amazing session.
thanks for
So my
attending.
so my question was about the discussion part, where you said the unanswered questions.
Yeah.
You mentioned something which was weird for me because I heard the opposite before about the cliche sentence, do more research about it. So how exactly do you want us to phrase this sentence inside the discussion part? Because it was a bit confusing for me.
Right. Okay. So the question is about whether you should talk about future research directions and questions that you come up with, like during the writing of your discussion. And
Yeah,
this is, I mean, you need to, the key here, right, is to prevent like other people from reading your paper and coming up with ideas based on what they've read in your study. You want people to cite you, okay? So what that means is that if you think of future research directions that you might take, I would recommend putting sentences into your discussion that say that. So based on the results of this study, future research directions that could be taken would include X, Y, and Z. You don't have to say that you're going to do them, right? But you can phrase it in such a way that you are the first person to think of those particular research ideas, those knowledge gaps, as we talked about a little bit earlier, which means that people have to cite you, okay? They can't read your paper and come up with these ideas for themselves. They've got to cite your paper where you explicitly stated that, you know, I've done this experiment, I've got this particular outcome. In the future, it would be a good idea to develop this on X, Y, and Z conditions, or A, B, and C drugs, for example. The whole point of doing that is to force people to cite you, okay? So hopefully that makes sense.
yeah. So I mean, so is it okay to like mention this, say you can do future research on,
Yeah,
like, you use
yeah,
the same methods but on
definitely.
different
Yeah,
population, different kind? Yeah, okay.
definitely. Because what that means is that if you put that into your discussion, you've put down like a placeholder, you've put down like a marker in the literature that shows that you're the first person to think of this, right? This,
Yeah,
by the way, is another good reason why negative results should be pre-printed or published if possible, okay? And I know that this is not easy to do because journals are looking for positive steps forward. They're looking for positive results, but it's always a good idea to at least preprint, even if you do an experiment, let's say, or a clinical trial or a survey of patients, and you don't get the outcome that you necessarily expected, or you get a negative result. It's still a good idea to put that into the literature as a preprint, right? Because you're helping other researchers, you're advancing the field, you're preventing potentially a colleague from going down that same blind alley in the future. That's also very important to keep in mind. Okay, we didn't have time to talk about preprints and preprinting in this session, but it is a way that you can get negative results published in such a way that other people will then use that information in your field. Okay.
So even null hypothesis results can be published?
Yeah, and they should be, because you are helping the pharmacy community by publishing as a preprint, potentially, because it's difficult to get those published in peer-reviewed journals, right? Because as we just mentioned, like, peer-reviewed journals will look at negative results and they'll say, well, this is not new, this is not interesting, but you can preprint those outcomes because it will stop somebody else from going down the same road, right? I mean,
Yes,
that's a big service, especially in a clinical field like pharmacy, where doing research can cost money,
Yes, I understand. Thank you, Doctor.
Okay, cool. Thank you for your question. Really, really interesting.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gareth, for your time. So not to waste more time, you could only take more 2 people, and then perhaps we'll be sending Dr. Gareth's all social media, so you could text him or email him more questions. So apologies. We'll take next Destiny.
Thank you so much, Dr. Garrett. Can you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear.
All right. Let's say I have a research question, and obviously I would need to read literature to know what knowledge is about that topic.
Yep.
First of all, so how much of these papers, let's say I have like 10 to 50 papers about that question, I have, do I have to read every part of this paper? Some persons say just read the abstract. Like, which exact part of the paper do I have to read to be sure that I have all of the information I need from that
this
paper?
Is one way that AI tools can really help, and there are a number of them. And we'll send you some information in the follow-up to this that synthesize literature for you. Okay. So I don't know the answer to that question, because it will depend on your specific kind of hypothesis, the kind of question that you want to test. But generally speaking, people would look first at the abstract, because that should encapsulate like all of the key information in a paper, and then decide if they should read on, decide if they should, investigate more, look at the rest of the study. Okay.